Good morning. We'll be in Habakkuk, of course, this morning. Focus, second chapter. And the last verse, as I've already promised, I wanted to devote just a few lessons in the book of Habakkuk, which I've never done before. And the years that I've been preaching, and my personal impression, and it may not be yours necessarily, that Habakkuk, among the minor prophets, and there are 12 altogether, he kind of stands in the shadows a little bit. He's probably not one of your favorites. Could be that the book is not one that you tend to want to read all that much. We don't give Habakkuk all that much press time in terms of actually studying the book. We don't preach on it all that much, and so I just wanted to try to give a little bit of focus to the book, not verse by verse, not all the way through necessarily, but really to kind of focus on some of the themes, main thoughts that are connected to the book, and hopefully to draw some lessons from it that will help us. At least I hope so anyway. The same thing could be done with any of the minor prophets and all the minor prophets, but in the book of Habakkuk, what draws me in part to the book is the nature of the prophet himself, the kind of man that he was struggling with things as he saw them in his world, in his society. The fact that he understood that Israel was to be punished by God, and that punishment involved a higher power in terms of earthly powers moving in, taking over, and he's trying to understand how that can be, because Israel has had their problems over the years. They have become steeped in idolatry. Still, there were good people at heart, many of them anyway, and the power that was in force at the time, Babylon and so forth, corrupt, evil, violent people, and it was hard for the prophet Habakkuk to put it all together, to try to understand how God could use a power like that was more wicked than they were to punish them. And I suspect that if we were in the same situation, any of us might reason the same way. If there would be an exception to that rule, I would be surprised, because it's just human nature to try to factor things that way. So this book, in my mind at least, is fascinating from that standpoint, perhaps among many others. I asked Peyton Peyton through Brad to sing the hymn that we sang at the outset. Number 108, "The Lord is in His Holy Temple." And that hymn is very familiar to you, and our text is familiar to you basically through that song. The words of the song come from our text, Habakkuk 2:20. The music to it was written a long time ago. It was written, as you'll notice in the hymn, or in the songbook, written by William J. Kirkpatrick in 1900. So it's an old song. People have used it for many, many years, and we're familiar with it. It's very simple, only has one stanza, and it's chapter 2 at verse 20 that comprises the entire song. As much as we love to sing it, and I do, I don't know if we fully understand the text, Habakkuk 2:20? Maybe we do. It's not difficult. It's pretty simple. But I'd like for us to explore it just a little bit this morning. As far as the remote context of the passage, always look at a passage in its context. The remote context means that you branch out. You look at the wider picture, the bigger picture, to try to understand, well, where is the writer coming from when he makes the statement that he does in chapter 2 and verse 20? Well, in the remote context, as I've already mentioned, and as we have covered in 2 previous lessons on this, Habakkuk is trying to understand why things are the way they are. Why does God do what he does? How is it that people who are less evil can suffer at the hands of people who are more evil than they are? And it's the question of why. And again, that's the larger context of it all. And the prophet Habakkuk is like many, if not all of you. He questions things. He wonders about things. And he's trying to figure out why things happen the way they do. That's the larger context of it all. Now, the remote context, that means you come down closer to the verse and you look at what's there, closely connected to verse 20. Look at what the writer says. And then it'll help you to understand, perhaps, where he's coming from. So if you will, in verse 18 and 19, the focus is on false religion. It's on idolatry of the day. And among the woes that are pronounced here from, about verse 6 on down, idolatry is one of them. There are several of them. Idolatry is the last focus of the prophet. And he looks at it, and here's what he says. What profit is an idol? That a maker has shaped it, a metal idol, a teacher of lies. These things are made by human hands, he says. They can't speak, but they teach lies. Well, there are more ways to teach than just speaking. For its maker trusts in his own creation when he makes that which cannot speak. And yet people trust in the very image that they've made. He's trying to understand, how can that be? But yet that's what Israel has gotten themselves into. In verse 19, woe to him who says to a wooden thing, an idol, awake, to a silent stone, arise. Can this teach? Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, and there is no breath in it at all. You say, well, that's idolatry. We have our own idols too. The idols of modern people may not sit on a shelf. They may not be carved out of wood or stone, but people do have idols that take the place of God. It can be most anything. But that's the remote context. Here are people that do this kind of thing, and God has said to Habakkuk, look, these people, they will pay for it. They will not get off scot-free. And the prophet steps back, and he assesses the whole situation in view of the remote context, in view of the immediate context, and his impression is this: the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. I want us to think about that for just a little bit. As simple as that statement is, it's profound, and I hope that it hits you in the heart. silence. Nothing wrong with that. Let all the earth keep silence before him. You know, there's a certain reverence to silence. When people are talking and joking and laughing, it's all good. But there's a certain reverence to silence. Just standing back, saying nothing, just taking it all in. There's a certain reverence connected with that. Somehow or another, we've taken Habakkuk 2:20 over the years, and we have applied it to entering the auditorium and people needing to stop talking. Don't laugh. Don't joke around. You enter in here and you show reverence. Now, I can understand, people need to be considerate of others. We do need to be mindful of the fact that, I could very easily disturb somebody by my camaraderie, and I need to kind of hold it down a little bit. But Habakkuk 2:20 has absolutely nothing to do with entering into an auditorium. There is no connection whatsoever, because the meaning of this passage runs deeper than that. Reverence covers your life. The Lord is in His holy temple, not just on Sundays. Every day, all the time, every waking hour. The Lord is in His holy temple. Now, there's a reverence to that? Yes. Should I learn reverence? Yes. The deeper meaning of the word reverence is not silence so much as it is fear, awe, because that's the basic meaning of the Hebrew term here. It's used many times in the Old Testament. So there's a fear and an awe that people have before God. And Habakkuk had gotten to that point in his questions with God. So there's a reverence that is connected with silence. And that's okay. And I noticed in Psalm 11 and verse 4, in fact, I guess the entire Psalm 11 focuses on it. But in Psalm 11:4, the reading is very similar here, although a little different. The Lord is in His holy temple, the psalmist writes. All right. The Lord's throne is in heaven. His eyes see. His eyelids test the children of man. Okay. A little commentary on Habakkuk seems to me. All right, but there is a reverence that is tied to silence. Let all the earth keep silence. The world needs to learn reverence before God, and if people ever learn that, they'll draw closer to God. But then secondly, there's a trust that is connected with silence as well. And that's what Habakkuk had learned. For all of his questions, and he had many in the first chapter, did he receive satisfactory answers? Well, I guess he did. But he learned to trust in God, and he learned to step back just a little bit. And even when, the answers aren't always forthcoming, when they're not always point blank, and you have questions, and everybody does, you learn to trust in the Lord. I may not always understand why good people suffer, but I have to learn to step back and say, okay, God made this world, I didn't. I'm part of His footstool as I live on this earth. I have to learn to trust not my judgment and assessment, but the Lord. So there's a trust that goes along with silence, that all the earth keep silence. And when I learn that lesson, I think that I'll learn what it means to pray. Not my will, but your will be done. Jesus knew that. He prayed that way. Is there something that I need to learn in my prayers to God? Not my will, but your will be done. That is trust. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus handed it all over to the Father. There's a trust connected with our silence. Sometimes I just have to keep my mouth shut and turn it over to God and trust in Him that everything will be okay. That all the earth keeps silence before Him. Trust. When people learn to trust God, then that'll put an end to hatred, to bigotry, to violence, to human oppression, and they'll learn to trust in God, keep silence before Him. And then thirdly, there's a submission that is attached to our silence as well. You know, submission, people are prone to argue, not only with one another, but with God. And people will come back, you know, when truth is impressed upon them, they'll say, well, I don't understand how that can be. Well, I think this, I think that. I don't see anything wrong with this or that. So there's people arguing all the time, arguing with God. And people will do it in word, or they'll do it in deed, or both. But there's a trust connected with our silence. And Habakkuk, I think, had gotten to that point. For all of his questions, as I remember last week, we were touching on this somewhat. And the Lord said to Habakkuk, just be patient. Be patient. Things will work out. Just wait. It's all right. Habakkuk, if you will live by your faith, you'll be okay in a world that's falling apart all around you. And then the Lord said to Habakkuk, the woes, hear the woes pronounced on these evil people, and there's several of them. And as I pointed out last week, Habakkuk kind of backs off a little bit. And he says, okay, the Lord is in His holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before Him. And Habakkuk had finally gotten to the point that for all of his questions and for all of his doubts, it was time to shut up. It's time to keep silence. It's time to reverence God. It's time to trust in God. It's time to submit to God. And as the book of James points out to us New Testament readers, in James 1, 19 and 20, be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath, because the wrath of man works not the righteousness of God. And in verse 22, be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving your own selves. There's a hearing and a trust that is connected with our silence, and that means submission. Okay. Maybe I understand Habakkuk 2:20 a little bit more. I don't know. Maybe when I sing Psalm or the Song 108 in our hymn books, it resonates with me as more than just an old hymn that was written in the year 1900, or at least music put to it, but the words long before that. And it becomes more than just a quick little hymn that I like. maybe in all of my questions and whatever doubts I have as I struggle through life, I can learn something from Habakkuk to say, okay, God's in control of things. God will handle things. The Lord is where He's always been. He's in His holy temple. The psalmist says that's heaven. And I just need to keep silence before Him and let the world do the same thing. And I can learn something from that. That doesn't mean don't teach. That doesn't mean you never oppose corruption and sin. That means you turn it all over to the Lord. Continue to live His way by His will. And that becomes your mantra, to live according to the will of God. Silence, it's okay. Let all the earth keep silence before Him. Okay, turn your life over to Him. You know, the Lord is in His holy temple every single day. Today, tomorrow, all the time, as long as you live and breathe, He's there. Turn your life over to Him. Obedience to the gospel is primary. Faithfulness to it has to be there. Something to think about. Come before the Lord who's in His holy temple. Obey Him this morning while we stand and sing to encourage Him.